of our Theology 5 class. This is Eschatology and Anthropology, still surveying some of these future events. And last week we were in Revelation chapter 6, I believe. And we were talking about the seal judgments that are being unfolded, that Jesus Christ is opening this seventh seal book. Only he could take the seventh seal book. And it says the Lamb opened one of the seals. And he is opening each seal. And where did we finish with this? We just got to number 4, right? Because that was the seal of death and unspeakable tragedy. Okay? And so then the 5th seal is the seal of martyrdom. And here he sees under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. Now the altar could either be the brass altar, you know, in the heavenly brass altar. Remember the tabernacle Moses built had the brass altar? And what did they offer upon the brass altar? And it wasn't in the holy place, it was in the tent area. What did they offer on that brass altar? All of the sacrifices. They offered all the sacrifices. But then inside the holy place, there was another altar. And what was that altar? The altar of incense. So the question really is, what is this altar? It's a small question. And certainly it's not of major importance, but still it's kind of interesting. Is that the altar of incense? It could be, because they're praying. And the altar of incense does speak of prayer. But the altar of sacrifice was the altar of death, where the animals were offered and their blood was shed. And here was the souls of those who had died for the faith of Christ. They had shed their blood for Christ. So it could really be either one. I don't know which one. I might say I have a preference toward one, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, they were under the altar. And it says they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" And white robes were given to every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. So I guess God even has a plan for people to be martyred for their faith. But this answers a big question that people have. When people die, what do people often wonder when people die? What are they doing? Do they know do people, when they die and go to the presence of the Lord, know or care what's going on earth? That's a question. I think that's a question a lot of people may have. What about these men or women, these martyrs? What are they asking? What are they asking? Now, don't all say it at once now. No. Bern?
Asking about the men with the robes of white.
Oh, that's who they were.
Oh.
They were dressed in white robes, which means I don't believe that they had actually been given their final resurrection body. Their souls were under the altar. So these were, so think about this. This is similar to what will happen for a believer who dies today. In other words, when we die today, where does our body stay?
On the ground.
That's right. It stays on the earth and hopefully goes to the ground, right? Better to go into the ground than into a crematorium, you know, to be cremated. But then our soul goes to be where? In the presence of the Lord. So I believe these are tribulation saints. They had died for their faith, but their bodies were still on earth, but their souls were with the Lord. And they were conscious. There was no soul sleep here. They know it's happening, but they know it's happening where? On earth. So that's kind of interesting.
1.5.
Yes. Seal of martyrdom. Yeah.
How does that speak that they know what's going on?
Excuse me?
Which verse?
Verse
Oh,
10.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So they say they want to know how long. How long, Lord, until you avenge our blood? They want what? What do they want? What everyone wants. Justice. They want justice. They want righteousness to rule and reign. So this shows us a number of things. First of all, there's still not perfect righteousness on the earth. In other words, the kingdom of Christ has not yet been established on the earth. And it does show somehow, and I don't want to go too far into this idea, but it's there. It is here that souls in heaven know what's going on the earth. And they're praying. They're praying, how long? That sounds like the psalmist praying. How long, Lord? So it's really fascinating that these who have died for their faith, their souls in heaven, still praying for justice. So this is the seal of martyrdom. So during the tribulation, and again, I think this is just kind of what's going to be happening during the tribulation. There's going to be huge amounts of martyrs. We meet them in chapter 7. There's a huge number of martyrs of every kindred of people, of all languages. They're before the Lamb, and they had been slain for their faith. So perhaps these were these martyrs. Maybe these were some of the 144,000 who will later be martyred for their faith. So there are different groups, and both Jews and Gentiles will be martyred during the tribulation. So I think this is covering that. Okay, any questions? Yes, Audrey?
So when will these saints get their glorified bodies?
At the resurrection, and we'll talk about that when we talk in Revelation chapter 20. So when Christ comes back, and then when they go into the kingdom, these martyrs during the tribulation will rule with Jesus and us. We will rule together, I believe, with the church and the tribulation saints. That's when they'll get their glorified body. Okay? Yeah. Okay, any other question? Yes, Eunice?
Since they will get their glorified bodies during the 1,000 years, but those that survive won't have glorified bodies, right? That survive the tribulation. Right. Yeah, those who survive the tribulation and they're saved, and then they enter the kingdom, they will not have their glorified bodies. So when will those people get? At the end of the millennium. Okay, seal 6, this point 6 is the seal of desperation. And this is where things come to a culmination. The 6th seal, a great earthquake, and then these great signs. And this compares to Matthew chapter 24, where the sun and the moon and the stars are all referenced in verse of Revelation 6 and verse 12 and 13. We have the sun as black, as sackcloth of hair, the moon as blood, and the stars fall. The heaven departs as a scroll, as when it is rolled together. And the way I read this is that it's as if John brings us right to the brink of Christ coming. But then he's like, wait, I got to tell you more information. Let me fill in more blanks during what's happening during the tribulation. So the heavens departing as a scroll. Who do you expect to see? I expect to see Jesus. When it departs, he's going to go through. He's going to appear. But he doesn't tell us of that appearing again until chapter 19. But it gives us the responses of those who are still rebellious against the Lord and the Lamb. And in verse 16, what do they pray? They pray. But what do they pray? And who do they pray to? It's almost like they're praying and crying out to the mountains and to the rocks. Rather than to the rock of ages, they're crying out to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from who? The face of him. And from the wrath of the Lamb. And that is the glorious appearing of Christ. In other words, They will see his face, and his eyes will burn as a flame of fire, and they will experience his wrath. The sword is out of his mouth. And so they're saying, hide us from the face of him. So that's why I say this leads us right up to the brink of the second coming of Christ. But yet he gives more information. So that's why I think that this is a overview of the entire 7-year tribulation, because it brings us right up to the brink of Christ coming. And I think this also is borne out in Matthew 24. If you go to Matthew 24, so there's catastrophe on earth, and letter B is convulsions in the sky. Convulsions in the sky. And that's Matthew 24 and verses 29 and 30. And I think, Esther, if you and Bailey could read those two verses, Matthew chapter 24, verses 29, and then verse 30. Bailey?
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken.
And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
Okay, so here's my point. Does verse 29 cross-reference? Can you just pick that phone up? Because I don't want to just pick it up and hang it up. I'm sorry. We're just don't answer it. Does verse 29 cross-reference and parallel Revelation 6 verses 12 and 13? Do you think they're the same events? That's my question. It says, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of heaven shaken.
I think so.
And then it says in Revelation 6, the sun became black. They're calling back. Just let it go. Forget it. We tried. The moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell when she is shaken of a mighty wind. So do you think they're the same event? It sounds like to me. So if you agree with that, if you agree with that, then I think you would agree with me that these seals overview the tribulation, because this is at the end of the tribulation, right before the Lord comes. It says, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. So he's going to come at that moment. So, and I think it's a good position myself, so I'm trying to convince you that I'm right. But anyway, it's interesting. Okay, so did you get the blanks there? Number 6 is the seal of desperation. There's all sorts of catastrophe on earth. There's the earthquake, and that also earthquake, we're not looking at that, but the verses are there. I believe at the end of the trumpet judgments, there was an earthquake, and also at the end of the seal judgments, there's an earthquake. I see that as actually the same earthquake happening at the end of the tribulation. And that marks the final movement on earth. And then there's the convulsions of the sky. And remember, that goes all the way back to Genesis 1. God gave us the sun and the moon and the stars to be for signs as well as for seasons. So they're the signs, the convulsions in the sky. Okay, any questions about that? Yes.
Where is it that you're saying that the people are praying to the rocks?
Well, they're crying out to the rocks in that sense.
Oh, okay.
They're talking to the rocks.
Okay.
So that's what ultimately prayer is, when you're asking God for something, so they're not praying to God, they're crying out to the rocks. It was my point that they're so unrepentant and so hardened and by their sin that they won't cry out to the Lord for mercy, but they'll cry to the rocks to fall upon them.
Thank you.
Okay, so letter B, again, we're summarizing here. Summary, survey. 2 great deceiving personalities of the tribulation. With great power, signs, and lying wonders, energized by Satan himself, these 2 personalities will seek to deceive the nations of the world. They will look very successful in doing it. Along with the devil, these 2 individuals will form an unholy trilogy, a counterfeit of God's holy Trinity. And it is through these two men that Satan works in these final, especially these final 3.5 years. And I prefer not, I've heard people use the word Trinity to refer to Satan and then the Antichrist and the false prophet. I say that they're a trilogy,
Yes.
and very wicked, of course, you know. So I only use that term Trinity for God, because really Trinity means a triunity of the personality of God, three distinct persons as one. And really this isn't a Trinity either, because these are still three distinct persons, and they're not one in the same, in any kind of the same way that God is one, Father, Son, and Spirit. But yet I believe that Satan, as a counterfeiter, he's always counterfeiting God. And this is his best attempt to try to counterfeit the nature of God. Of course, he fails. But number one is the Antichrist, the beast out of the sea. And that's Revelation 13. We could go there, please. Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, the beast out of the sea. The Antichrist. What is he characterized by? What is the Antichrist? What is his main allure that will draw people to himself?
Deception.
Okay, how will he deceive?
Peace. I'm offering peace.
Peace, yeah, you could say that, perhaps. You know, the emphasis, look at this. And when I ask that question, I'm going to answer it by looking at what word repeats itself. Remember how I always say, you know, look for those words that repeat themselves to see what theme is God is drawing us to, or he's emphasizing something over and over again here. And it says, and he's described this beast out of the sea, rising out of the sea, which is the turmoil of the earth. I believe the sea there is a metaphor of the earth, having 7 heads. Remember the 7 heads? They're the 7 great world empires, which were what? Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then a revived Roman Empire. That's the 7. And then the 10 crowns. Many people believe those are the 10 kings over which he rules. And then it says, and upon his heads, and how many heads were there? 7. I actually put this sermon that I preached in church, I put it on our church Facebook page, and it's on our website if you want to go there. I think it's a pretty interesting, very interesting sermon, because this passage is so fascinating. But 7 heads, and on all those heads, what were the names? Names of what? Blasphemy. So in other words, those 7 kingdoms were all characterized by blasphemy. What is blasphemy?
Lying about God.
Lies about God, evil speaking about God. And now, as you go through this, look at verse 5. And where are we at now? We're over here. Marilyn, are you there? Could you please read Revelation chapter 13, verse 5? And then, Christy, if you could read verse 6, please.
Revelation 13, 5. This Bible doesn't have that part in it.
Okay.
Oh, except it's broken.
Oh,
No.
okay, that's all right.
No,
You know-
I read. 13:5. It was just torn out.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Revelation 13:5 says, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemous, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months.
And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in him.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is that as he begins to describe this Antichrist, on all those 7 heads were names of blasphemy, and then he goes back to it as a chief characteristic of his personality, that he was a blasphemer. So the spirit of Antichrist is a spirit of blasphemy against God. And we have to accept that that's what this world is about. And so we have to be very careful, in the things that we do engage in this world, because a lot of the things of this world, even the entertainments of this world, and so many of the things on television and in Hollywood, and on videos and whatever. It's just a blasphemy, you know, and the Antichrist is going to specialize in that, and people are going to be drawn to him because of that. So that's one of the features of this Antichrist is blasphemy against God. Now, how is he described here in verse 2 and 3? Or verse 2. Look at verse 2. And we're back to Edgar. Could you please read Revelation chapter 13, verse 2?
And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority.
Okay, and the dragon who gave him that power and authority was who? Is Satan. Okay, so definitely here's a man completely energized and moved, possessed even perhaps by Satan. But what three animals are referenced in that verse? Leopard, bear, and a lion. Now, where does he get them from? Where does he get those names from? Those animals from? What? Daniel chapter 7. That's right. Good job, Esther. And Daniel describes the different kingdoms of his day in Daniel chapter 7. And we'll go there. We're just going to look at this verse. Daniel chapter 7, the lion, and look at verse 3 of Daniel chapter 7. Daniel had a vision, and he says the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great seas, and four great beasts came where? Up from the sea. Okay, so where does this Antichrist come? From the sea. And I believe, again, that this refers to the earth, because if you look here in verse 17, Daniel interprets much of his vision for us. If you look in Daniel 7:17, he says, these great beasts, which are four what? Kings. So we know that they're kings. So they're metaphors of real kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So that they're coming out of the sea. What is a metaphor of, do you think? Of turmoil, of turbulence, you know, waves crashing. And so kings often rise when there's a turmoil of the people, and the greater the turmoil, sometimes the more power they can have over people. So anyway, the first is a lion. The second is a bear, the third is a leopard, and the fourth beast was dreadful and terrible. And he's describing the kings of Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And just the point is that John is taking these metaphors, and he's saying that the Antichrist, again, remember the Antichrist had 7 heads, so he has attributes of these different kingdoms, and so it's not surprising that he would use these different animals to refer to the Antichrist kingdom. So the Antichrist is going to have aspects of, you know, Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome and all these kingdoms, but blasphemy against God. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Antichrist. And what's one of the most compelling things about the Antichrist, and what is often then even associated most with the Antichrist as you go through the Revelation story in the book of Revelation through the tribulation? The beast causes everyone to worship him and accept his what? His mark or his image. And that's repeated. Like if you look in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 9, where it says, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. And verse 11 is the same. The smoke of their torment ascends up forever. They have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So it's all, that's kind of repeated. The beast, his image, is marked. So don't let anybody put, you know, your credit card in your hand or your forehead. That's getting scary. No, what do they call that? Yeah. Oh, tattoo, yeah. Well, that's another story. But Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Antichrist, the world's final political ruler and dictator until Christ himself will come and reign forever. Anti meaning, yeah, he's against Christ, but the world receives him instead of, in place of Christ. Other than Christ, they believe in an Antichrist. Okay, so that's the Antichrist. Then the second one here is the false prophet, or he's the beast out of the earth. And that's how he's described also. And verse 11, another beast arising out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb. He spoke as a dragon. He will be more the religious ruler. He leads many to worship the Antichrist. And he's often called the false prophet. If you look in Revelation, look in chapter 16, verse 13. And here we see all three together. Okay, and are we to Anna? Could you please read Revelation chapter 16, verse 13?
And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet.
Okay, so the dragon is who? Satan. The beast is the Antichrist, and the false prophet is this religious ruler who pushes, if you will, or leads people to worship the Antichrist and receive the mark of his name. So again, you know what you have here? You have a union of church and state. You have the Antichrist, the political ruler. You have a false prophet, a religious being, and working together. And this is, again, the great error of religion throughout history is, well, I should say, from the days of Christ and in the church age, I should say in the church age, is that the church is to be separate from the state. But the Antichrist and the false prophet unite church and state together. Okay, did I see a hand up? No? Okay. Also, we see them together as well. This is a very good time we see them together, being thrown into the lake of fire together. And this is in Revelation chapter 19, if you can look there, and then we'll move to the next point. Revelation chapter 19, it says in verse 20. Okay, Eunice, could you please read that, please? Revelation 19, verse 20.
And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worship his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone.
Okay. And then finally, we see the devil cast into that lake of fire after the millennium in Revelation 20 and verse 10. And they're also referenced there. The devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So again, we see them often together. The devil, the beast, and the Antichrist. Thank God, in hell forever. But the false prophet is called the false prophet in the book of Revelation. Okay? So any questions about that? So the two great deceiving personalities with Satan, you could actually say three, because Satan is their king. But the two humans, these are human beings energized by Satan, is the Antichrist and the false prophet. Okay? And then on to the next page then, we have the marriage supper of the Lamb. So what's going to happen? We believe the rapture can take place at any time. We're going to go before the Lord. What's going to happen? What will be the first thing that we experience? The judgment seat of Christ. We talked a little bit about that last week, the judgment seat of Christ. And then I believe we'll have the marriage supper of the Lamb in Revelation chapter number 19. And verse 7 and 8, let us be glad, rejoice, give honor, for the marriage of the Lamb is come. His wife hath made herself ready. Now, who is his wife? I believe here it is the church. And Revelation 19, verse 8, to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. Blessed are they which are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. He saith unto me, these are the true sayings of God. I believe that the marriage supper will be for all believers saved during this dispensation of the church. That's my take on it. In other words, I still don't believe in this marriage supper. We have the Old Testament saints resurrected yet. This is the rapture is the rapture of the church. From whenever the church began until that moment that Jesus comes back and takes us up to be with him. And then we will go through the judgment seat of Christ and then the marriage supper of the Lamb. After this, now here we see an expression in verse 11. What are the first three words of verse 11? And I saw heaven open. So now this little phrase is going to, and I have them all listed here in your notes. It appears 8 times, and John uses this phrase, and I saw, to bring us into eternity, into the eternal state. This is the first of 8. And so here he's going to talk about the coming of Christ, the splendor of the Savior's coming. So here we see, and we'll look at these in a moment, but skip down to letter A under those bullet points. Look at letter A. We see the matchless character of Christ. Now just look at these verses. When I say the matchless character of Christ, look at those verses, just scan them, read them to yourself for a moment. What about those verses tell you of Christ's character? Okay, so maybe raise your hand and speak up so I can call on you. I heard somebody say something over there. Yes, Esther? Okay, yeah, that's his character, that he's faithful and true. What else? What else? Remember what those martyrs cried out from under the altar? What did they cry? How long? Until you avenge our blood. So he's going to come back and bring righteousness. Audrey?
He's a righteous judge.
Okay, he's a righteous judge. That's his character. He's going to answer their prayers. Okay, what else? What do his eyes tell you of him? Of his character? What do his eyes tell you about his character? They were like what? In verse 12.
Flame of fire.
Okay, what does that tell you of his character?
He's not going to play.
Okay. Pure holiness. Vengeance, but holiness. I mean, you've heard of it was like his eyes, it was like he could see right through me. I think his eyes, that's the way, it's like piercing. Wisdom and holiness. And on his head were many crowns, authority. And he had a vesture that was dipped in blood. I believe this is not his blood shed for us, but actually the blood foreshadowing of those who he will slay. And his name is called the Word of God. So those are all things of his character. Okay, then letter B, we see his majestic coming. His majestic coming. We see his character and now his coming. And we see his army in verse 14. Oh, I'm sorry. 4 is the glorious revelation of Jesus Christ. The supreme splendor of his coming. The glorious revelation of Christ. So we have the marriage supper and then the glorious revelation of Christ. And so we see his character, his coming. And then who's the army that's following him? Verse 14. That's us. What are we following him on?
Horses.
White horses. Now, this is another question. Everybody who has this question, are there animals in heaven? This isn't, now we know there's animals in the millennium because the children are going to play, by the with the snakes and so forth, and the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and so we know that the animal kingdom will be at peace. But this is horses in heaven, and Jesus is on a white horse. A white horse. That's a really nice horse. And we're going to be on that horse. It says the armies which were in heaven followed him. And why do you think we say this is us? Why do we say it's us? What are they clothed in? Clothed in fine linen, white. And who's described as wearing fine linen, clean and white in this very same chapter is the wife who has made herself ready in verse 8. Again, is that a cross-reference to the same people? They had fine linen, clean and white. The fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. And now the armies which were in heaven followed him on white horses. So here's us, okay? I believe what's going to happen. We're going to die. Let's say the Lord doesn't come back and we die before the rapture. Our soul will go to be with the Lord. Our body will stay here on the earth. The rapture happens. What's going to happen? Our soul will come back with the Lord. And our body will raise up and resurrect, reunite. That's going to be really wild. All these bodies flying through the air, and the souls, it's like, which one, where am I? Which is mine? It's like you got to find the right, the body has to find the right soul. Imagine if the body gets in the wrong soul. No, this is the wrong one, it doesn't fit. But anyway, so yeah, there's like a reunion of body and soul, and then we'll stand before the Lord. And I believe it's important because we believe in the resurrection of the body. Jesus rose again bodily from the grave. So then we'll stand before the Lord and we'll have the judgment seat of Christ. And then we'll have the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then he'll say, okay, let's go to the horse stall, and we're going to get on our white horse and we're going to come back with Jesus on the white horse. And we won't have to fight the battle. He'll do it. So that's his redeemed army. And I believe we're referenced in, go to Revelation 17 and verse 14. And I believe we're also referenced in this chapter, Revelation 17, verse 14. And this is talking again about the kingdom of the Antichrist when the Lord comes back. And it says, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And that's how the Lord describes his army on the white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. We've been made righteous by the blood of Christ, and we're chosen by him, and we're called by him. And because of that, we're faithful to him, even unto death. And we will experience this in reality one day. Amen? What a day. What a day that will be.